Good morning, everyone. Welcome back to Coffee and Headlines, our morning get-together live here on Facebook, where we endeavor to find the best or the most uplifting or important or positive, the good stuff. We find news in local newspapers, in state newspapers, and nationwide newspapers, and we connect the information that we find with whatever you bring to the table, questions, ideas, comments, suggestions, so that we can all benefit from this knowledge as a community of English-speaking locals. This is what Coffee and Headlines is about. Today is Monday, April 17, and it is a pleasure, as always, to meet you all here, particularly those that are watching live for the first time. If that is your case, please let us know by writing the word new in your comment. We'll be so happy to give you a nice little welcome. And if there's something really important that you wish to share or get a reaction about or a comment, please add a capital letter Q at the beginning of your comment, and we'll be happy to address it during the second half of the broadcast. Today, we have a little bit of this, a little bit of that. I hope you had a great weekend. I'll tell you a little bit about what went on in my weekend shortly. But first, let us take a look at some of the news that we're concerned about this morning. There's not a lot of stuff to pick from, but we have yet another article showcasing how well Puerto Vallarta is doing, at least as it relates to tourism. According to Carlos Gabriel Lopez, who is the president of the local chapter of Mexico's Chamber of Commerce, or CANACO, Puerto Vallarta has topped pre-pandemic numbers when it comes to tourism arrivals, with a 17% increase when compared to the Semana Santa and Semana de Pascua period in 2019. So this is good news. We're getting more tourists in town, and this is good for the destination. This is good for our economy. And this is a good reminder, I suppose, for those that are in the business of making the town presentable, friendly, and, well, you know what I mean. You know, I always hope that the city is mindful of the fact that, you know, along with this increase of tourism, we also need to see an increase in concern for keeping the city in top shape. Moving right along, the Nationals, oh gosh, I wrote it, but I cannot pronounce it. The National Seismologic Service, the earthquake people, the earthquake people from the nation of Mexico, reminds us that the first national earthquake drill, National Seismologic Service, I think that's the way you say that. Anyhow, we're going to have the first drill of the year this coming Wednesday at 11 o'clock in the morning. You know the drill, no pun intended, if you're living here. At this point, here in Puerto Vallarta, you can expect to hear the sirens go off, the same ones that are used for the tsunami drills. You can also expect large hotels and city hall and other government businesses to actually conduct an evacuation exercise. We can only hope that it won't be like the last drill, which took place on September 19 of last year, as we felt not a little tremor, but we felt a major earthquake in town just minutes after the drill took place. For that matter, September 19 of last year was the third time an earthquake with a magnitude of 7 or higher was felt in Mexico in the last 37 years. So is that a freaky coincidence or what? We don't know, but this Wednesday we expect to do coffee and headlines. Then we may try to actually stay online until after 11 just to see if we can hear the sirens from here, from my home. And then, of course, Wednesday afternoon, we will have our lovely meet and greet. And we will hopefully get a chance to meet each other in person then and there. And speaking of meeting each other, we met each other this past Saturday after that little bit of a man on a Canadian flight who was all ruffled because he was not waited on in French. It was quite interesting to read your reactions, both during the broadcast and also to read some of the letters that you sent me after the fact. Clearly, a lot of you are invested in explaining the cultural differences in Canada, and I am very grateful for the context that some of you shared with me. Although I will be the first person to admit, and I'm not saying this to hurt anybody's feelings, I am as invested in Canada's cultural issues, I am invested in the cultural issues of any other country. I don't live in Canada. I will not live in Canada at any point in the near future. So personally, I'm not concerned about what goes on in Canada beyond what affects my dear Canadian friends. What I'm concerned about is Mexico and the fact that in Mexico, our official language is Spanish. And it was so interesting to see how some of you got defensive about whether English or French should be speaking in Canada, while some of you so quickly forget to honor Mexico's official language once you set foot here. Now, I was not going to touch this anymore this morning, but I also got among the correspondence that I received, this particular viewer shared this message with me via email, and I know that she lives in Canada, or I think she lives in Canada because her domain and her email address was shaw.ca, and I think that is a Canadian domain. Anyhow, the question was, news and stories for Puerto Vallarta's English-speaking community. Why are all the articles in Spanish? So my response to that was, of course, thank you for reaching out. Spanish is the official language of Mexico. Most of the articles are written in Spanish because we feature news about Mexico, which is written for news outlets published in Mexico. In Spanish, of course. And then this lovely lady struck back and said, thank you, but then why advertise it as news and stories for the English-speaking community if the English-speaking community can't even read the articles because they're not in English? Okay, so I'm happy to explain this. We happen to feature half an hour a day, 6 days a week, of news and stories in English for the English-speaking community. In fact, if you're watching now, guess what? You are enjoying news and stories in English for the English-speaking community. The show notes are there for several reasons. I will start with the most obvious one. Number one, because credibility has been important here at Coffee and Headlines since day one. And I want you to know that I don't make any of this shit up. You know, I take my cues from important news sources. Number two, the show notes are there as a courtesy for those of you who realize that Spanish is the national language in Mexico and are curious to learn more about our culture, and that curiosity includes learning our language. Gary Bertels asks, is there a banging my head on a wall emoji? Well, I want to spell it out loud without sounding condescending, although I fear I may lose some subscribers today. Number 3, the show notes are there for those of you who understand that Google Translator provides enough of a decent translation from one language to another that if you are so curious, you can get the gist of what's going on. But we are news and stories for the English-speaking community, because if we had been news and stories for the English-speaking community with show notes in Spanish because it happens to be Mexico's official language, the name of the show would have ended up being way too long. So I do apologize if the name of Coffee and Headlines, News and Stories for the English-speaking community, is not explicit enough. If any of you are so invested in Puerto Vallarta and call it paradise, but can't learn the language, that's not part of what we offer here. We don't offer Spanish lessons. Every now and then we will explain some things just because we try to find friendly ways for you to adopt our culture. But we see you, us Mexican nationals, we see you walking into stores and asking for things in English without having the decency of saying, ¿hablas español? ¿Hablas inglés? We see you at restaurants just turning around to the table next door and blurting something like, oh my God, the weather is so nice here, isn't it? In English, already assuming that everybody around you is going to speak your language. So take all the time that you want defending whether Canada should have English or French or the label should be this and the other. That's entirely up to you. But while you're here, just remember that Puerto Vallarta is a very unique and special place where a lot of the population, actually some of the population, can understand you. But the rest of it, nope, not really. Let's take a look at the weather. The weather says it's smurfing sunny. And let me put the weather on the screen so that I can read it. It's smurfing sunny, 25 degrees. Humidity is high, 51%. Fahrenheit degrees are 77 right now. And our weather forecast for today, clear skies through the day with a high of 29 and a low of 17. Tomorrow, Tuesday, will be a humid day with mostly clear skies, a high of 30 and a low of 17. Wednesday will be a humid day with clear skies again with a high of 29 and a low of 17. And one final comment, if I may. And again, I don't mean to offend in any way, shape, or form. There were those who said something along the lines of, well, I am a person of a certain age and learning languages is not easy for me. Well, then if you are a person of a certain age that has trouble learning languages, then perhaps you should not be living in a country where you are expected to speak other languages. In other news, the series Acapulco, starring Mexican actor Eugenio Derbez, is taken over the Westin Hotel, has taken over a few areas of around Marina Vallarta, and now they're going over to El Centro. We learned that certain streets in El Centro, including Mina, Galeana, Agustin Rodriguez, and Matamoros, will be closed for traffic until tomorrow, as the series is filming a few scenes in town. So feel free to go out there and stargaze, or feel free to find a different way to get through the city. I also want to let you know that last week we shared the reminder by friends of Puerto Vallarta Animals about their weekly adoption events at Plaza Caracol. Now they are announcing that on Saturdays, a larger number of cats and dogs can be considered for adoption at their own shelter. And once again, they've featured a number of links in this Facebook post that allows us to connect with the organization and find the shelter's specific location and their Instagram page and so forth and so on. And their announcement is in English and Spanish. So that's lovely inclusion, which brings me to another point, which I forgot to mention before. If I was in the business of translating not only the titles of the articles, but also the content of the articles, I would be plagiarizing content from all these wonderful news sources. And I would have a huge number of lawyers at my doorstep with legal action against me. And this is something we cannot afford. Moving right along, let's take, one more before we forget. I want to remind you that Wednesday we have our meet and greet. For those of you that are part of the cluster that live here, for those of you that live elsewhere, happen to be in town this time of the year and want to meet some of the people that usually comment on a regular basis, we meet for our spring meet and greet this coming Wednesday at Whiskey Kitchen from 6 to 8 p.m. Avenida Francisco Villa 694. Be there or not. And now, let's see what your comments, your thoughts, your reactions are all about, along with your good mornings, which are usually wonderful, and today is no exception. Lots of good mornings, Doug, I'm sorry to hear that you're going to miss the meet and greet, but you know we are always here to get together. Let's see what else we say. I missed the location of the meet and greet. I missed a couple of your reports. Well, Josh, that's what the show notes are for. In fact, if you go to the beginning of the comments today, there is a comment that goes on automatically, welcoming everyone. And you can see that all the information that you're looking for, show notes, comments, reference information, etc., is located in our website. Let's see what else we have. Doody-doo. Kathy says, happy to be watching live. Well, I'm happy to be broadcasting live this morning. Let's see. Kelly says, learn a little Spanish if you're intending on spending time here. I'm currently taking a course. Good for you. Not learning Spanish while living in Mexico is like going to the movies without wearing your glasses. You may get a big picture, but it may be blurry. You will miss all the finer details. Thank you for saying something that I didn't want to say, Claude, but that's the bottom line. And thank you for that wonderful attitude, Den. I really like the links to the articles in Spanish. They give me an opportunity to learn more Spanish. There you go. Thank you for that, Deb. The last thing that I want to do here at Coffee and Headlines is waste anyone's time, including mine. But every now and then, a little bit of clarity hopefully goes a long way. Oh my goodness, Judith, don't be embarrassed for an entire country. You know, be a good role model for those people that are around you. It's a lot easier to achieve. If you try to tackle the whole country, you may forget to have fun, and we would not want that. Christine says, my understanding has always been that you were providing a service for translating the news for us. And if I wanted to know more, I could read the article myself in Spanish or Google Translate. I tuned it over COVID because you were explaining, translating very important information for us. Thank you, and don't change a thing. Thank you for that, Christine. I often equate what we do here as what the little sample people do. Well, the people, they're not little, but the people that throw samples at you at Costco do. You know, there are men and women having little trays with little nibbles that you can try, and you can choose to try them or not. But if you try to engage with the sample providers on the nutritional value of the samples Or if you say, oh my God, this is a lovely cracker, but why aren't you letting me sample it with ketchup on top of it or with other condiments? Then, then the little people are bound to show you the rolling head that I showed you a little second ago. This one. See? There you go. My housekeeper speaks very little English and very little Spanish. And I very little Spanish. I'm trying to learn. We use Google Translate and do fine. We are teaching each other. I respect the national language. Thank you very much, David. A friend of mine who moved to Puerto Vallarta to retire and to love the Mexican people and love the Mexican culture had a little scuffle with the security guard at her condo and came back to her apartment a while ago bitching and moaning about, I just don't understand why they don't hire people that speak English. You go to the bank and sometimes the bank speaks English and sometimes the bank doesn't. Why? Because the bank is not under any obligation to speak English. Let's see what else we have. My husband suffers from dementia and has been able to learn Spanish. He's able to talk and listen. Not perfect, but he tries damn hard. Claude, it is so unfortunate that the very first time I hear you talk about Lucas's dementia in these circumstances publicly, because the way Lucas, who is a friend of mine, as you are a friend of mine, and a friend of many in this country, is conquering his condition while adhering to the laws and the customs and the language of our country is incredibly heartwarming. Equally heartwarming was for me this weekend to walk all the way to Moro Paraíso. And it is a cobblestone road and it takes 1 hour to get there walking. And I had the privilege and honor to walk alongside my dear friend Dan, who is older than me, and valiantly pushed Kathy's wheelchair next to me all the way through the cobblestones. We could have taken a taxi, but they insisted on going by foot. These are English-speaking locals that truly are embracing our city. So when you come to me and say to me, Puerto Vallarta is not as handicap accessible or wheelchair friendly as it could be, I'm going to throw you in their direction so that you can see how it's done. Let's see what else we have. I started learning Spanish when we moved here. The beautiful thing is when my Mexican friends talk to each other, it's so fast I don't understand, but when they talk to me, they slow it down so that I can. You have good friends, Mark, and that is wonderful. Michael had the nachos at Whiskey Kitchen. Very good, and we'll be having them again. These are the nachos that we praised the other day because Gina throws pork rind into them, which is not usual, and it's absolutely wonderful. Let's see. Harold says, when I am asked why I don't speak more Spanish, I say soy flojo. Well, that's your choice. If you choose to be lazy, that's entirely your choice. I certainly hope, Harold, though, that you don't belong to the tribe that usually complains when things are not provided in English while in Mexico. And the last one here comes from Kathleen. Den and Kathy are inspiring. If you ever have the privilege to have their doors open to you in friendship, Kathleen, you have no idea. They are the most beautiful human beings one could ever hope to have as friends. And this, my friends, brings us to the end of Coffee and Headlines. Again, no intention here to ruffle feathers, simply to put ideas, thoughts, and questions in our heads. And finally, if Coffee and Headlines is not provided in the language, circumstances, or style that you wish, I am sure there must be other news sources available for you out there, and you have my best wishes for you being able to connect with my country in the way that best suits you. This is what we have. So if you like it, come back soon, maybe even tomorrow. Have a good day.